Folks, I have been watching a lot of Dimension 20 lately. For those brand new to my channel, I like to explore broader philosophical topics through the lens of pop culture. In this case, I'm going to be exploring the relationship of a performer to their audience. But first, I get to geek out a little bit. Dimension 20 is a show on Dropout TV, arguably its flagship property. It features actors and comedians playing D&D campaigns, always a homebrew setting that's a twist on a genre. For instance, Fantasy High is a John Hughes teen comedy meets the standard D&D setting. Mice and Murder is Wind in the Willows meets an Agatha Christie mystery and is light on combat. There are about a dozen seasons and almost as many campaigns. Most are DM'd by Brennan Lee Mulligan, who was an instructor at the Upright Citizens Brigade. If you know anything at all about improv, and I would consider it one of my specialist topics, along with birds or historical plagues or Jesus Christ Superstar or rocks or being an instructor at the Upright Citizens Brigade is kind of a big deal. Dimension 20 is Brennan Lee Mulligan's baby. He created it, but a lot of people work really hard on it to make it excellent. The art direction is world class. There's nobody doing it better. Lou, Allie, and Zach are incredibly funny, with Zach especially being great at physical comedy. I think Gorgug is maybe my favorite player character in any D&D setting. Emily is also an Upright Citizens Brigade alumna, and she is wildly inventive. Murph is maybe the person I have the most in common with as like a D&D player and possibly as a person. And I'm always struck by how willing he is to get really vulnerable as a character. Siobhan is a writer for Rick and Morty, and it shows. She knows how to write a character arc. She is whip smart and funny, and I just love her. And these are just the main cast members. There are several seasons where they bring in a whole guest cast, and it's always great. I cannot recommend this show enough. Please stop everything after you watch this video and go watch it.
I need 3 bird facts right now, go.
Cassowaries have a back toe that locks like velociraptors into a joint, and they apparently can hear heartbeats, and they can stab through a rib cage with their back toe and stab you in the heart and kill you. Obviously, penguins mate for life, but you also know that the daddies incubate the egg, so penguin daddies incubate the egg. Owls are nature's slowest flying bird.
Yeah, that's great.
You know what else is cool? Brennan Lee Mulligan is a goddamn comrade.
Here's the thing. I don't know what you kids are up to, but I do know one thing. Laws are threats made by the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group in a given nation. It's just a promise of violence that's enacted, and police are basically an occupying army. You know what I mean?
Or at least from his Twitter, he seems to be, I don't know. Dimension 20 is so good that it's a little bit intimidating. They are at the top of their game creatively, and it makes me look at myself and say, God, am I doing everything I should be doing with my one short, beautiful life? And that's a little bit hard to write about. Like, it's easy to write about when something sucks, but when something is wonderful, no thoughts, just vibes, what do you say about it? You gonna know something really weird?
What?
Brennan Lee Mulligan looks a lot like my grandma. Like a lot like grandma.
Do you think Brennan is your grandma?
Do I think Brennan is my grandma?
Roll an insight check to see if Brennan is your grandma.
Okay, fine.
Well, what is it?
Dimension 20 owes a lot to my sainted grandmother, Brennan Lee Mulligan's improv background. Now, improv is short for improvisational theater, so in order to give you a history of improv, I'm going to have to give you a short history of theater as well. Now, it used to be in the pre-modern world that when somebody made a good or provided you a service, you knew who provided it to you. And this was probably also true for the performing arts. Like, a lot of ancient epic poets used to perform for probably fairly small audiences. Theater, as we would recognize it, was developed by the Greeks, and pretty early on, the actors were performing to crowds of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people, which meant the actors couldn't really know everybody they were performing to. They were alienated from their own audiences. Improvisational theater of a kind was performed as early as the 1600s, when the commedia dell'arte had stock characters, broad plot outlines, but no written lines, so the actors improvised them. Modern improvisational theater originated in the early 20th century in acting classes, with comedic improv being a very popular outcropping of that. Most improvisational comedy is structured around games whose rules provide a groundwork for a scene to unfold along. If you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, you're probably familiar with a few improv games. Most of the players on Saturday Night Live, College Humor, Mad TV, SCTV, the Upright Citizens Brigade television show, and The Kids in the Hall came from an improv background. Improv can be incredibly funny, but it can be a lot more than that. It can be moving, it can be angering, it can be dramatic, and the reason why it can be all of those things is because improv is way more about honoring the scene and paying very close attention to your scene partner than it is about anything else. And because of that, it meshes incredibly well with tabletop RPGs. I think a lot of this compatibility between D&D and improv comes from the fact that they're both games that are also performed, although tabletop RPGs are typically only performed for your friends, and improv is typically meant to be performed for a larger audience. It's pretty hard to capture what it's like to really play Dungeons and Dragons. Part of what is lost is how intimate the experience of playing it is. Like, I can tell you that it was incredibly cathartic for me to play a character who started a campaign as this loner who didn't need anybody and who hoped to God nobody needed her. But I can't make you feel your heart in your throat as you make the final roll of that campaign to determine whether or not you are a good enough pilot to crash an airship full of your friends in such a way that it won't kill them. I can't tell you what it's like to blow on your die for good luck and then let it go. Remember how I said the origins of theater has baked in a certain lack of intimacy, performing to dozens or thousands of strangers? D&D isn't theater. There's no script, only your decisions and the dice. You can only tell this story once, between friends, and then it's gone. So I do wonder what happens in the translation from D&D, the game, where everything is very organic, very unscripted, and film, which is static and unchanging. The weird thing is, it doesn't feel like much has been lost at all. When I first showed Dimension 20 to my husband, who's never played D&D, he says that the appeal for him is that Dimension 20 is remarkably like hanging out in your living room with your friends. And for us, during a pandemic, that has been something we have sorely missed. That's a little dangerous, you know. 10 years ago, I went to dinner with one of my newly single buds, and he was in a bad way. Like, he was not taking the breakup well. And after the waitress took our orders, she walked away, and he watched her go. And he said, she's really cute. And I was trying to be a good friend. I was like, hey, you should ask her out, Who knows? Maybe it'll work out. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, the waitress never wants to date you. And I felt, ridiculous. Like, of course the waitress doesn't want to date you. I'd been a waitress. I knew this instinctively. The service industry is full of people who are either very charming and therefore do well in it, or who just need to make money, who are required because there's a market for it to not pretend to be your friend, but to be personable, to be very charming, and not necessarily in like a way they really feel. It's a little bit coercive. Well, performers are kind of in the same boat as service workers. Like, they have to be personable, and especially internet personalities, maybe more so than, actors or musicians. They kind of have to be like your little bud in order to make it. So is a performer like the waitress? Does the performer not want to be your friend? And I think clearly that is the case in some instances. But more than that, what if the performer can't be your friend? There's a concept in neurology called the monkey sphere that says that primates, based on the amount of white matter in their prefrontal cortex, have a predictable number of social connections that they can keep track of. And for human beings, that is about 200 people. And beyond the light cast by our primate brains onto our loved ones, onto our friends, onto our acquaintances, lies the void, sort of this roiling Lovecraftian mass beyond any light our minds can touch. And that is who performers have to speak to. As a writer, there are ways you get around the problem of writing to a void. And one of them is an ideal reader, as suggested by Stephen King in his book on writing. An ideal reader can be a specific person. For instance, Stephen King writes to his wife, Tabitha. As an actor, I hear the process is a little bit different. You tend to have a scene partner that you connect to, or maybe you pick a face in the crowd to have nice feelings about, that you want to have a good time. But one thing kind of remains constant, and it's that if you go to the trouble of taking a step beyond, writing a manuscript and putting it in a drawer, or maybe going to some acting classes but deciding you don't want to go on stage in front of all those people. If you do put yourself out there and speak to that void, it has to be because you want it. I don't know what the relationship of the performer to the audience is. I don't know if there is some magic that happens between yourself and the void when you speak into it. I just know whatever there is there, I need it. There is a term for the other side of that relationship, for an individual in an audience to a performer, and that is called a parasocial relationship. I feel like the discourse around parasocial relationships is kind of crystallized at this point. Parasocial relationships, bad, creepy, wrong, all that. The data doesn't really support those conclusions. The sexiest angle to cover parasocial relationships from is the dark side. And don't get me wrong, there is a substantial dark side to parasocial relationships. But 99.9% of the time, they're healthy and they're normal. And sometimes an article will sort of gesture in that direction, like, yeah, they're normal and healthy, but, be sure to feel guilty about it so you don't become one of the weirdos. So that's a thing we have to worry about. And I'm sure it's great and fine and healthy that we have to do that kind of work in all aspects of our life. There is a concept, death of the author, which is often badly misapplied. It's not an ethical concept or anything. It is an analytical framework that asks the person doing the analysis of a piece of artwork not to treat that artwork as a scrying tool into the mind and soul of an author. I wonder if it still applies to a work like Dimension 20. Does it end up verging on solipsism to say that I don't know people who I have watched for well over 100 hours interacting out of character as friends? And that is not even getting into the fact that just because something is a performance, that doesn't make it inauthentic. Jung, a psychoanalyst, would say that any time we interact with the outside world, we are using a part of our psyche called the persona, and not our truest inner selves. Just as an aside, the term persona comes from Greek theater. It was the masks that the actors wore. So the analogy to theater is very much intended. We present different sides of ourselves to different people. I love my husband very much, and I love my grandmother very much, but it would be incredibly inappropriate for me to speak to them the same way. Judith Butler says that identity, our concept of ourselves, and how we relate to the world is performative, which is not quite the same thing as saying it's performed, but it's a pretty strongly related concept. So maybe performances are all we ever really see of anybody. They may be, in fact, the way we know ourselves, the way we forge our own identities. And if that's true, maybe we do know the people on Dimension 20 as well as we can know anybody. Or maybe the opposite is true. I mean, maybe we are limited by our own perceptions and their ability to communicate, and we only ever see each other through a glass darkly. And like, have you ever really looked at your hand, man? You may be surprised to learn that not all philosophers believe that acting is ethical, and I think for the sake of this discussion we can include improvisational acting as well. For instance, the Puritans had major objections to all acting. Rousseau believed that luxury, of which theater was a subset, made people decadent and wicked. I don't find these arguments compelling. But there are better ones which I think we should consider rather than dismissing them out of hand. Plato called the ways in which art corresponds to the physical world mimesis. And of course, to Plato, truth is the ultimate form of good. To him, theater as an art form was simply too far removed from reality to be truly ethical. His student, Aristotle, disagreed. He believed that the function of theater was cathartic rather than purely representational. The psychoanalyst Jung and then later Joseph Campbell broadly agree with Aristotle, although they went a step further. They said that not only does fiction provide catharsis for the reader or the viewer in the case of theater, it provides a deeper connection to our own psyches and to our collective humanity. Bert Holtbrecht, a philosopher and playwright, used the alienation between the actors and the audience and developed techniques to heighten it in the hopes that it would help people come to an intellectual understanding of the action on the stage, and that the audience would then take that understanding, go out into the world, and change it for the better. I've already touched on Judith Butler and performativity, but the point being, a lot of philosophers and other thinkers believe that theater and stories are how we get to know ourselves, and more than that, how we create ourselves. On the anti-side, Francois de la Rochefoucauld made an argument that was similar to Plato's, but subtly different. He believed that portraying real things reduced them to caricatures of themselves and produced a confusion in the viewer about what is real and what is not, and what is true and what is not. Now that, I find interesting. I'm not sure if I agree with it, but I do find it compelling. Postmodernists like Baudrillard believed that in this modern era of mass production, we create images based on images based on images until the original is dissolved into smoke and air, and we have nothing left but the reproduction. What I'm getting at here is ceci n'est pas une pipe. This here isn't a pipe. And when we watch Dimension 20 cast members out of character, we're still only seeing a portrayal of them. Not in the sense that they're faking something, but in the sense that an image of something is not the same thing as an original. There is necessarily something left out, which means death of the author still applies. We can know the portrayal of the character, Brennan Lee Mulligan, but we can't use that portrayal to look into the mind and soul of the author, also named Brennan Lee Mulligan. So far, I've focused exclusively on parasocial relationships with real people, but that's not to say there's no such thing as a parasocial relationship with a fictional person. In fact, it's pretty gendered who prefers what. Men seem to prefer relationships with fictional people, whereas women seem to prefer parasocial relationships with real ones. But the thing that's really weird, it doesn't seem to matter whether the person you have a parasocial relationship with is real or not. And that messes with my head a little bit. This seems to go back to the phenomenon of when you interact with a piece of fiction, when you look at a painting, when you imagine something, like if I ask you to remember what it was like to hold your grandfather's leathery hand in yours when you were little, the same part of your brain that would light up as if you were actually doing that lights up, which kind of screws with me as somebody who tends to believe that if something has a material effect on the world, that is what makes it real. Like, forget the question of whether I know somebody who I have a parasocial relationship with. What is knowable at all then? Like, how do I get out of this postmodernist bullshit nightmare and back to watching funny people roll some dice?
No thoughts, just vibes.
Maybe this will help. We use the same word know when we know a person and when we know that a sulfur-crested cockatoo is the oldest bird on Earth. That feels wrong, doesn't it? Like, when we know a person, we don't just know a lot of facts about them. In fact, there are a lot of people who I'm pretty close to who I don't know a whole hell of a lot about. No. When we know a person, we have given them the chance to reject us. And they have, at least for a time, not taken that opportunity. Fandom will, on its own, catalog facts and images about the objects of its affections as a replacement for that sort of authentic interpersonal exchange. However, sometimes celebrities will encourage parasocial attachment. For instance, back when I was in the Adam Driver fandom, we would make these sort of stock jokes, like, Adam Driver is stacked like a library. Threaten my marriage in a gas station bathroom, you sentient side of beef. Break my spine like a glow stick, you terrifying moose. So yeah, like John Oliver, but many years earlier. Well, imagine my shock when I turn on This Week Tonight and...
Crush my larynx, you unwieldy boulder. Explode my... Oh, fuck. Oh, shit.
Hey, John.
Oh, wow, Adam Driver. Can't believe you're calling.
Oh, good. Listen to me.
Yep.
What the fuck are you doing?
Excuse me?
This bit.
Right.
This bit. This thing you've been doing that's either sexual or violent.
No, you know, I like to think of it more as a little column A, little column B.
This strange bit that for some reason you pulled me into. What is it? When you first started doing it, it was easy for me to shrug it off.
Especially with those shoulders, I bet.
Oh, that doesn't feel good. And maybe it's because I'm out of fandom, or maybe there's something unrewarding about getting what you always wanted. But this, combined with this, for some reason, felt kind of off. Here's a different joke by Brennan Lee Mulligan.
Super quick and easy. Thanks for telling me how your question's going to be up top. I know this is silly, but I must know. Are you my freaking dad? Can you go ahead and roll an insight check? Are you serious?
What?
Did you roll a nat 20?
Did you actually roll a nat 20?
Did you roll a nat 20? In a very real sense, we are all passengers on Spaceship Earth, and I firmly believe from the bottom of my heart that we are all family to one another. So wherever you are, and to everyone watching this, you're part of my family, and I hope you feel the same way about me and also about all of us and each other. The bad news, Hustler Bo Jenkins, is that you're going to have to change the name Hustler Bo Jenkins because your real name is Hustler Mulligan. I'm your dad. I'm your biological dad.
I don't feel weird about this one at all, but I do have questions about it. Like, is it encouraging a parasocial attachment? Let me not leave myself out of the censoring here. Earlier in this video, I did a little skit. And it was fake. It was totally fake. And maybe you knew that. Like, I'm not the best actress in the world. But even if you did know, maybe it gave you a little impression that you had a window into my personal life. Maybe I encouraged you to have a parasocial attachment to me when I did that. And is that okay? The answer is, I don't know. I am not asking these questions to imply an answer. I am asking them because I don't know the answer. Or to come at it from a different angle. When I watch Dimension 20, and every once in a while, I catch myself feeling really sad that I will never hang out with Brennan Lee Mulligan. Am I doing something wrong? And like, obviously this is a normal way to feel. This is a really popular show. It's a show about sort of hanging out and having fun. Obviously a lot of people feel the way I do, but the way I feel is valid. Like, I love birds. I'm a philosophy major. I have genuine things in common with him. So unlike you, my feelings are valid. A couple of good things did come out of my parasocial attachment to Adam Driver. The first being that, you know, I'm a writer now, and as I have gotten more success, I've had to interact with people who I first knew through work that they did and was a fan of. And I have thought a lot about how to ethically interact with somebody who I'm a fan of, like how to really listen to them, how not to make that interaction about me and what I need from them. Another, maybe more personal thing. I was a kid who had a lot of promise. Like, I was in a gifted and talented program. I was a winner of several performance and art awards at my schools. I was somebody who people thought was going to go places. And then at 30, I found myself having not drawn anything for years, having not performed anything for years, and having not written anything for well over a decade. When Adam Driver sort of came to prominence, the thing that really struck me was he was my age. He was at the top of his game, and that was a slap in the fucking face. I am a person who loves performing. I love writing, and I love Ajax, and I love Sophocles, and I am going to fucking die someday. I need to get my ass into gear. I literally started writing again because of that wake-up call, and I'm grateful for it. Like, he wasn't the direct cause of it, but he didn't need to be. And that's actually a studied positive side to parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships allow us to meet some, not all, of our social needs in an environment where we literally cannot be judged. And that can be really positive. Think Mr. Rogers. And while, yes, there is no give and take with a performer in the audience in the same way there is a give and take with a friend, but a performer is communicating to the audience, and that communication, at least, is very real. And there is nothing wrong with taking joy in that, with finding some pleasure in art. Like, I would have to be pretty small-souled to think there's something wrong with that. You can go watch my Pathologic 2 video to see my defense of pleasure as inherently worthwhile. Now, the benefits of parasocial relationships don't make the problems with them disappear. We still live under capitalism, and performers are maybe kind of required to give more of themselves than is psychologically healthy for them or for the audience. But maybe the conversation is just a little bit more complicated than just parasocial bad. What do I get from Dimension 20? There's a sense as I get older and possibilities start to close themselves off to me that the muscle that imagines the possibilities ahead of myself has started to get weaker. When I meet people, I don't tell them things like mated pairs of goldfinches have a unique song they sing to only one another so they can find each other. Because that's weird, you know? And you don't want to be weird, do you? Improv demands that you take all of that anxiety about maybe you're weird, maybe you're not interesting, and whether or not it works, just put yourself out there and connect with people. And that's something I need in my life right now. And maybe on top of that, there is someone on Dimension 20 who I see a little bit of myself in sometimes. And rather than finding it weird or awkward, I find it charming. Maybe I have been too hard on myself.
Honey,
What?
are you single white female in Brennan Lee Mulligan?
No.
Okay. Love you.
Love you.